persons of its ruler. The other says to God, I love thee, O Lord, my strength. And therefore the wise men of the one city, living according to man, have sought for profit to their own bodies or souls, or both. And those who have known God, quote, glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened, professing themselves to be wise. That is, glorying in their own wisdom, and being possessed by pride, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. For they were either leaders or followers of the people in adoring images, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. But in the other city there is no human wisdom, but only godliness, which offers due worship to the true God, and looks for its reward in the society of the saints, of holy angels, the saints of the holy angels, as well as holy men, that God may be all in all. Well, now, one thing Augustine thought, I said he thinks of the whole history of the world as best construed, understood in terms of a kind of conflict or contest between these cities. One thing he thought then is that scholarship, the intellectual life, is ordinarily, for any sort of relatively large-scale, deep scholarly project, in the service of one or another of these cities. Either it's in the service of the city of God or in the service of the city of the world. Or it might be some confused combination, because we human beings aren't always so clear about what it is we are doing. And what we're actually doing might be quite different from what it is we think we're doing. So that's how he saw scholarship, as intimately involved in this contest. Another person who thought the same way was the great Dutch theologian Abraham Kuyper, who was the last person, as far as I know, to be both a great theologian and a prime minister. He was prime minister of the Netherlands around the turn of the last century, and he also was a terrific theologian. He too thought that there was this kind of contest between that the world of scholarship. In the world of scholarship, one doesn't find really neutrality with respect to the battle between these two cities, but you find rather the contest between these cities reflected in scholarship, reflected in scholarly projects of various kinds. And I think that Augustine and Kuyper are both right. I think at present, the conflict isn't just between two cities, but between three. Or rather, maybe it's between one city, or two cities, the city of God on the one hand, and the city of the world, as divided into two boroughs, or whatever it is that cities come in. Boroughs maybe is as good as anything like the 5 boroughs of New York City. So, 2 boroughs. And I'd like to briefly say something about what characterize these 2 boroughs, or these 2 branches of the city of the world. All right? It seems to me that in the contemporary Western world, and I don't know that much about, what things are like in Japan or China, or even as far as that goes, Eastern Europe. I'm thinking basically of Western Europe and the United States as the Western world. In the contemporary Western world, in the contemporary intellectual academic Western world, there are, in addition to Christian theism, there are really 2 other basic perspectives, ways of looking at the world, 2 basic pictures, 2 basic ways of thinking about life and what life is all about and what's most important and the like of that. All right? The first of these I'll call perennial naturalism, and you'll see that on the sheet there. Perennial naturalism goes all the way back to the ancient world, to, for example, to Lucretius's great poem De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, also to Epicurus and Democritus. Among our contemporaries, naturalism has become extremely important, and I'm thinking of naturalism basically as the idea that there's no such person as God or anything like God. What there is just nature, or what, from a Christian perspective, would be just nature. That's what there is. There's no such person as God. And leading contemporaries who think that this way, or near contemporaries, Bertrand Russell, with his book, with his essay, A Free Man's Worship, the philosopher John Dewey, philosophers like Klein and Wilfrid Sellars and Donald Davidson, Carl Sagan, with his portentous incantation, the cosmos is all there is, or ever was, or ever will be. A striking example would be the book by Daniel Dennett called Darwin's Dangerous Idea, which I recommend to you. it's an outstanding example of naturalism or exposition of it. In my opinion, it's completely wrong and mistaken, wrong-headed, but I recommend it to you anyway, because you ought to know how naturalists think and what they do think. One thing Dennett thinks, oddly enough, is that, I don't know how many Baptists there are here, but he thinks Baptists ought to be put in zoos. You'll have to read the book to see why he thinks that. But that's his idea. Baptists, we ought to keep a few of them around, but keep them from corrupting the rest of the population by keeping them in zoos. All right, they're sort of lions and tigers. They're dangerous, so you got to keep them in zoos. Baptists are dangerous too. You got to keep them in zoos. All right, so you might like to take out his book sometime and take a look at that and figure out whether you think he's right. I mean, maybe, you think maybe that's where Baptists ought to be. But take a look at Dennett and see what you think. So Daniel Dennett's book is an outstanding example of what I'm calling naturalism, as is Richard Dawkins, some of his books, The Blind Watchmaker, River Out of Eden, maybe some other of his books. These would be examples of naturalism. And there are even some theologians who are naturalists. Oddly enough, you wouldn't exactly expect a theologian to be a Christian theologian or allegedly Christian theologian to be a naturalist, but there are some. So on the sheet there, from this perspective, there's no God, and human beings are properly seen as parts of nature. The way to understand what's most distinctive about us, for example, us human beings, for example, our ability to love, to act, to think, to use language, our humor and play acting, our art, philosophy, literature, history, our morality, our religion, our tendency to enlist in sometimes unlikely causes and devote our lives to them. The fundamental, the basic way to understand all this is in terms of our community with non-human nature, not in terms of our being created in the image of God and being children of God, but rather in terms of our community with non-human nature, now supposing that there isn't any such thing as God, so that non-human nature hasn't been created by God either. We are best seen as parts of nature and are to be understood in terms of our place in the natural world. In our own day, this way of thinking comes out most vividly, comes out really in this way. We are to understand ourselves really in terms of our evolutionary origin. That's the basic idea. We should understand ourselves in terms of our evolutionary origin. So we should understand all those above phenomena, our humor, love, play, music, and religion itself. We should understand all this in terms of, basically in terms of the origin of these things, in one place or another in some complicated way. The origin of these things in random genetic mutation of some sort, and then their perpetuation by natural selection. So there are sociobiological explanations of love, and they go like this. Well, let me just give you another example of the same kind of thing before I get to that. I say there are even these evolutionary explanations of religion itself. About every other issue of the New York Review of Books, which I also recommend to you as a good way of seeing what secular academia thinks about a wide variety of subjects, about every other issue contains another book, a review of another book on this general kind of subject, how to understand ourselves in terms of our evolutionary origin, or how to understand ourselves sociobiologically. I mean, this enterprise is called sociobiology or evolutionary psychology. One recent one was about one recent review about a book explaining religion along these lines. And it went something like this, and I'm not fooling, this is the way it went. The idea was, well, for a long time, we human beings were prey. Other creatures ate us, hunted us and ate us, which is miserable. Then, at some later time, we became predators. So we hunted other creatures. We ate them instead. That was great. And religion arose as a celebration of that happy moment. That's how religion came to be in us human beings. It's a little far-fetched because you might think we would need the consolation of religion a lot more when we were prey than when we were predators, but that's the basic idea. All right? Now, some of this is sort of funny, like that particular one is and ridiculous, but others have all the trappings of the latest science, complete with models and fitting data to models and mathematical work of various kinds and so on, and enlist work of people of the very highest levels of ability. So it's not something that can just be dismissed. And as a matter of fact, everybody I talk to who knows about these things thinks sociobiological and evolutionary psychological explanations of human life are very much on the ascendancy and will become a sort of orthodoxy in, say, in such areas as psychology, sociology, anthropology, the human sciences, and the like of that. Okay. I say that sometimes there are even Christian theologians who are naturalists. For example, the Harvard theologian Gordon Kaufman said this. He says, God is the historical evolutionary force that has brought us all into being. So his idea is we have to rethink theology, and now we've got to think about God very differently. We used to think about God as a person who created us, who loves us, as maybe Trinitarian, as such that Jesus, the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, came to earth, became incarnate, was crucified, sacrificed himself for our benefit so that we ourselves could have life and have it more abundantly. No, says Kaufman, we've got to think instead of God as this historical evolutionary force. That's what God really is. And that's a clear case of naturalism. And naturalism seems to me constantly influences and continually corrupts Christian thinking. It's about us, around us all the time. It's very hard to avoid being influenced by and being drawn in the wrong direction by naturalistic ways of thinking. It can lead us, for example, to think of love as in that naturalistic way, in that sociobiological way, as arising somehow in the course of our evolution by way of some genetic mutation and then being perpetuated by virtue of natural selection because it was adaptively useful. Thinking of love in that way rather than in terms of our relationship to God. And if you watch Sunday supplements and like that, you will see there too, as well as in the New York Review of Books, lots and lots of articles that attempt to explain ourselves to ourselves from that perspective. Okay? That's one of the two boroughs or the two divisions of the city of the world at present. Now here's the second one, creative anti-realism. And here there's an enormous contrast from naturalism. According to naturalism, human beings are fundamentally animals with a sort of peculiar way of making a living. I mean, sharks have got their way of making a living, and they've persisted for millions of years. We haven't persisted for, they've persisted for maybe 100 million years or more. We haven't persisted for anywhere nearly that long. We're probably not, we can't really compare ourselves in terms of evolutionary success with sharks, or for that matter with beetles that have been around longer yet and done exceedingly well. Or for that matter with bacteria that have been around for, I don't know, 500 million years at least, no more than that. Even longer than that. They've been around maybe for more than 1 billion years, and they have, I mean, they're the world record holders with respect to evolutionary success. So we don't really amount to all that much from the naturalistic perspective. But from the creative anti-realist perspective, it's we human beings ourselves that have somehow brought it about that the world has got the basic structure that it has. So not only are we, we are way beyond bacteria. We're way beyond everybody else, because the world owes its basic structure to us, according to creative anti-realism. You can find this too in the ancient world, just as with naturalism. In the ancient world, you can find it in Protagoras, the work of the Greek sophist Protagoras, who said something like, man is the measure of all things, of those things that they are, of those things that are not, that they are not. Man is the measure of all things. All right? But this idea got immeasurably deeper and magnificent expression, initially in the modern world, in the work of Immanuel Kant. In the work of Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher Kant, and especially in his first critique, the Critique of Pure Reason. Kant is a many-sided philosopher, and there's a lot of Kant that doesn't fit in with what goes on in the Critique of Pure Reason at all. So the Critique of Pure Reason isn't, so to speak, totally representative of Kant, but at any rate, that's his most influential book. And in that book, what Kant really says is that if you think about the basic ways we think about the world, we think about the world in terms of certain categories, right? The world is in space, so things are in space. and in time. We think of things as in space and in time. The world comes in thing, property, structure. What there are, basically, are a whole bunch of things, all of us in this room, a whole bunch of subjects, or a whole bunch of substances, things, with properties. So each of us has various properties or attributes. I mean, the property of being a human being, the property of living in the 21st century, the property of living in Florida, the property of having 2 arms and 2 legs, etc. All these different properties. Okay, so everything comes in thing, property, structure, in space and time. Also, he says, truth, that's another category. We think of some propositions as true and some as false. Also, even existence. There is the existence. We all exist. Some things don't exist. All of these categories, says Kant, aren't actually to be found in or a characteristic of the world as it is in itself. Rather, they're something we impose on the world. It's like we're wearing rose-colored glasses or something, only in this case they're much more complex than that. They're not rose-colored exactly. They're space and time-colored, thing, property-colored, truth, falsehood-colored, possibility, impossibility-colored, existence, non-existent-colored, and the like, all right? But since we look at the world in that way, that's how it is that the world we actually live in has that structure. It is the way it is because of what we do, because of our conceptual activity, all right? So this is a definite step up from naturalism. In fact, it's an enormous step up from naturalism. In a way, it puts us in the place of God, since it's really us who are responsible for the basic structure and lineaments of the world, and not just God. Okay. Now, this you find a lot of creative anti-realism in the contemporary world, but to find the version of it that's most prominent in the contemporary world, you have to take one step further here. According to Kant, we all construct the world together, you might say. It's not like there's one world for me and a different world for you. It's not like your categories are different from my categories. We all construct the world together in the same way. But if you take the next step in this dialectic, then the idea is this. If you look around at the world, it looks like different people live in different worlds, or if they've constructed the world, they seem to have constructed different worlds. The world of Carl Sagan is different from the world of Billy Graham. The world of Richard Rorty is different from the world of Jerry Falwell. People construct different worlds. Everybody, it might be that certain groups construct the world together. This group constructing it one way, this group constructing it a different way. It might be that everybody individually constructs the world. By virtue of our linguistic activity, by virtue of the way we think, we all construct the world and construct the world differently. The world is constructed by us. It's a construction. It's not there to be found. It's a construction, and it's not constructed by us all the same way. Different people construct the world differently. Well, so if you look here that below at section C there, relativism, there isn't any such thing as the way the world is. There's no such thing as objective truth, or a way the world is that's the same for all of us, whether we know it or not, and whether we like it or not. Rather, there is my version of reality, the way I've somehow structured things. There's your version, and many other versions. And what's true in one version need not be true in another. So, as Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, in effect, says, man is the measure of all things, echoing Protagoras. I am a man, therefore I am the measure of all things. All right? There's a syllogism for you. So in this way of thinking, there isn't any such thing as truth. What there is what's true for me, and what's true for you, and what's true for somebody else, but there's no such thing as truth just as such. When I first began teaching at Calvin College, or maybe even before that at Wayne University, I was really struck by the fact that lots of students talk that way. They say, well, maybe not, I would give a really powerful argument for something, and they say, well, maybe that's true for you, but it's not true for me, right? Well, at the time I thought this was like a sophomoric confusion, but it's something really much different than that. I mean, it's deeper than that. It's part of this widespread but deplorable way of thinking, all right, deplorable from my point of view, a deplorable way of thinking, that there isn't any such thing as just the way things are. What there is just how you made things and how I made things, all right? Well, there's one more little step here, this anti-commitment step, but I will forget that for the moment. So on page 3 there are these three major perspectives, three wholly different and deeply opposed perspectives: Christian theism, or maybe I shouldn't just say Christian theism, but theism of other kinds, of any kind: Islamic theism, Christian theism, Judaistic theism, the theism of some Indian tribes, American Indian tribes and the like. That's one. Then there's perennial naturalism. That's another that I've talked about. And then there's creative anti-realism with its progeny of relativism and anti-commitment. And then I shouldn't make out that every academic you scratch in the world will, display one or be a clear example of one or another of these three ways of thinking. They'll be mixed together in every possible and impossible confused way, in every conceivable way, and even inconsistent ways. You'll find these things running through each other, and you'll find the same thing in many of us, in us Christians too. It's not as if we all, so to speak, come as completely clear-headed and clear-thinking Christians who see exactly how to think about all these things. Not at all, not by a long shot. Okay. Well, that's the first. I should add one thing here before I go on. I said that there are naturalistic Christian theologians, or allegedly Christian theologians. The same goes for creative anti-realism. There are also creative realist, allegedly Christian theologians. For example, Don Cupid, who's a theologian at Cambridge. Here's something from him. The consequence of all this is that divine and human creativity come to be seen as coinciding in the present moment. The creation of the world happens all the time, in and through us. We do it. As language, we do it by virtue of our language. As language surges up within us and pours out of us to form and reform the world of experience. Reality is effected by language. And he goes on to say this is a philosophy of religion for the future. If so, I hope it's for the very distant future, when I'm no longer working in philosophy of religion, and so I won't have to really bother with it. He says it's a genuine alternative to pietism and fundamentalism, and we could add to any other form of Christianity, or in fact any other form of just thinking that there is such a thing as the way the world is. And this is often sort of touted, this way of thinking, as new and with it, and avant-garde and being up to date, and it has a certain cachet of novelty about it. All that is true. It is new and with it, but it's also totally preposterous, in my opinion anyway. It's about as sensible as trying to palm off, let's say, the Heidelberg Catechism or the Apostles' Creed or the Westminster Confession as the newest and most with it way of being an atheist. It makes no sense, in my opinion, at all, to suppose that this is a way to be a Christian. Okay, now I want to take just a few more minutes to say what I think the practical implication of this is. All right. So I think it does have a practical implication. And I think the first thing to see is that, as I say, science and scholarship aren't neutral with respect to these three worldviews, but science and scholarship are shot through with and intimately involved in the battle between these worldviews. And here are a list of examples. First, a couple from creative anti-realism. There is, for example, Richard Rorty's idea that truth is what my peers will let me get away with saying. That's clearly a way of thinking about truth in the world that is creative anti-realistic in this way. If truth is what my peers will let me get away with saying, then what's true depends on my peers. I mean, if they let me get away with one saying, then with one sort of thing, saying one sort of thing, then that's what's true for me. If they don't let me get away with saying that with something else, then that's what's true for me. My peers, my human peers, make things for me the way things are. And I'm, of course, one of my own peers, so I and they together make my world, all right? I think that's actually crazy, and I could give you some good examples to show why it's crazy, but I really don't have time for that at the moment. But take my word for it, it is crazy. Let me give you just one little example of why it's crazy. Suppose you've done something really bad. You've done something you think is wrong. You've fallen in some way, done a bad thing. Well, the thing to do from the Rortyian perspective, I would say, is to lie about it. Try to get your peers to let you get away with saying that you didn't do that, right? If you get them to say that you didn't do that, then it'll be true that you didn't do that. And if it's true that you didn't do that, you won't have done that. And won't even have lied about it. I shouldn't make, I mean, that's sort of like making light of Rorty, but I mean, I do think that that's a crazy way to think. There are other, I mean, creative anti-realism of this particular kind, Rorty's variety, you find very widespread. You find it in philosophy, in particular continental philosophy, European philosophy. American and British philosophy tends to be more naturalist. Continental philosophy tends to be more anti-realist. You find it in law, you find it in anthropology, you find it in a wide variety of areas. That's an example from the creative anti-realism side. I'd like next to give a couple of examples from the other side, the naturalist side. Here's one thing, the next one there, evolution. Many experts in the field declare that it's absolutely certain, that evolution is absolutely certain as that the Earth goes around the sun. As a matter of fact, that very comparison is used by many of these writers. They say evolution, I know there are people that don't agree with it, they say don't believe it, they're completely wrong. Evolution is just as certain as that the Earth goes around the sun. Richard Dawkins says this, it's absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is either ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked. But I'd rather not consider that. So said Dawkins in a piece in the New York Review of Books. And Daniel Dennett, whom I mentioned to you a moment ago, goes even further, goes one step further than Dawkins. He says that anybody who anybody who even has doubts about evolution is culpably ignorant. So Dawkins gives you a choice. You could be ignorant or stupid or insane or wicked. Dennett doesn't give you any choice. You just are two of these things. You're culpable, i.e. wicked, and ignorant. So the idea, I mean, this is really quite an amazing thing. Hardly anybody would say that about, say, relativity theory. If you have any doubts about special relativity or general relativity or some interpretation, say the Minkowski version of special relativity, if you even have any doubts about it, you're culpably ignorant. Well, that's what Dennett says about evolution. If you wake up in the dead of night, you think, can it really be that all of this living forms of life have come about by natural selection working just on random genetic variation of some kind? How can, you're just not sure that can happen. Well, if that ever happens to you, then you're culpably ignorant, according to Dennett. Now, why would he think that? Why would people say that? I think the basic reason is this. Evolution plays an important role in the whole naturalistic way of looking at the world. I myself think there's a fair amount of evidence for evolution. But if you're a naturalist, you are committed to it. There's no other possible way to explain all of this variety of flora and fauna that our vast world displays. The only suggestion anybody's ever thought of from that perspective as to how it is that all this stuff came to be that way is evolution. So it's the only game in town from an evolutionary perspective. So what accounts for this insistence, this claim that these things are absolutely certain, and if you even doubt, even have any doubts about it, you're culpably ignorant. What accounts for that is nothing like a careful look at the evidence, not at all. It's rather the naturalism that underlies this way of thinking. From a naturalist perspective, it's the only game in town. From a naturalist perspective, you do have to take it as certain or as utterly clearly true. You can't just think about it as, you can't just follow the evidence where it leads you. You're committed in advance. Another example, another example from the same area with a different twist. These people, these experts, Futima, Gould, Simpson, Dawkins, Provine, and others, they say that evolution shows that human beings are the result of chance processes and hence have not been designed by God or anyone else. And each of these quotations there says that. The first one from Futima, it says, by coupling undirected, purposeless variation to the blind, uncaring process of natural selection, Darwin made theological or spiritual explanations of the life processes superfluous. And he says Darwin's theory of evolution was a crucial plank in a platform of mechanism and materialism that has been the stage of most Western thought. And George Gaylord Simpson says something similar, last sentence there of that little paragraph. Man is the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have him in mind. Man is not designed by God or anybody else, but rather, as we've learned, discovered through evolution, is not designed by anybody and not intended by anybody. Another example there, Herbert Simon's recent article, A Mechanism for Social Selection and Successful Altruism. That's a sociobiological paper. I was talking a little earlier about sociobiology. Simon is a formidable intellectual. He won a Nobel Prize in economics. Well, he asks the question, and I won't have time to go through all this. He asks the question, why is it that there are altruists in the world? Why are there people like Mother Teresa that spend all of their time and energy trying to help other people? Given our evolutionary origin in terms of natural selection, the survival of the fittest, in terms of our being selected at each stage for the sorts of behavior that will get our genes into the next generation, given that, what you'd expect is that nobody would, human beings wouldn't sacrifice their own welfare, certainly not their own fitness, to help somebody else. But it looks like some people do. Look at Mother Teresa. Look at lots and lots of it. Even the rest of us too, in our own ways, maybe not nearly as successfully as Mother Teresa, do what we can to help the widow and the orphan and the like of that. How to explain all that? Well, says Simon, there are really two reasons, or there are really two mechanisms that figure in this. On the one hand, there is docility or teachableness. People are taught by the society around them that altruism is a good thing, and it is a good thing from society's total point of view that there be altruists. I mean, a society with a lot of altruists in it does better in competition with a society in which there aren't any altruists, where everybody is just sort of selfishly oriented. So that's one part of it. Docile persons tend to believe all this. And then the second part is what he calls bounded rationality, not being quite able to see where your interests lie. Bounded rationality, not to too fine a point on it, that's really stupidity. So the explanation of Mother Teresa is unusual docility, teachableness, together with a certain kind of stupidity. All right? And this kind of explanation of altruism is becoming extremely popular nowadays. It's not all of it is just like Simon's version, but they all tend to have the same general form.
Okay. Tell me what was going on in what you heard.
Discussion of worldviews, maybe, and paradigms of how people think, and how they think that they create their world through their senses.
Okay. Tyler? True to Be TV.
Like I was gonna say, like the discussion on like naturalistic worldviews